Hey everybody, welcome back to the Anyway Whatever podcast. I'm your host, Mike Fisher, and today's guest is director Scott Barber. Scott was the co-director of the upcoming documentary, The Orange Years, which is a documentary that's coming out on November 17th on iTunes and on Amazon Prime. That is a documentary about the formation and growth of the first 5 years of the television network Nickelodeon. It's really, really good. If you grew up watching Nickelodeon between 1990 and probably 2005, you are going to absolutely love this movie. It's gonna hit all the right notes and bring back all the right nostalgia, and you're gonna learn something about how something that was so important to your life was actually created. As a parent of kids who were in that age group who watched that network. I got to see all of that growth, and as an animator, it was important to me because it brought me the Nicktoons and things like the Rugrats and Ren and Stimpy and Doug and Rocco and Cat Dog and all of those amazing Nicktoons shows that they had. So this is a great episode. I think everybody's really gonna like it. We also talk a little bit about his next film, which is about a documentary about the heavy metal band Gwar. Which is also looks to be super killer. So if you are watching this show on YouTube, hit subscribe and click the bell. Hit like and share if you think somebody is going to like this episode. If you are listening to the podcast version, you can subscribe wherever it is you get your podcast content and give us a review. That stuff is always helpful. You can find us on social media at Anyway Whatever Podcast, anywhaywhatever.com. AWP _podcast at Twitter. My personal art Instagram is at Maximum Fluoride. This is a great episode. I was happy to have Scott on, and I'm hoping he comes back for that Gwar documentary. Check all of that out on the other side of the funky track. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Anyway Whatever podcast. As always, I'm your host, Mike Fisher, and today's guest is Scott Barber. And Scott is the co-director of the new documentary called The Orange Years about the formative years of Nickelodeon Network. What's up, Scott? How are you, man?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me. Yeah, everything's going good. It's as good as you can be doing in the middle of a pandemic, but we're excited to get this film out there and have people watch it.
Yeah, the production company got a hold of me and asked if I'd be interested in having Scott on, and of course. And then they sent me a link to the screener, and I actually got to sit and watch the film the other night. And me and Scott were talking a little bit before we got going, and I was saying that my kids, if you listen to this, people who listen to the show know that my kids are between the ages of 25 and 31. And so they were in the prime years of when this documentary kind of captures the growth of Nickelodeon from a kind of a small few shows to the juggernaut that it is now. And so I got to see it as a person who was a parent of somebody who watched the growth of that network. And so it was really interesting for me from that perspective. But anybody in the age group right now of 24 to 35, you're going to absolutely love this film because it is literally your entire childhood.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's what we kind of say, some Generation X and then the first wave of millennials. It's right in that whole age demographic. Yeah, we really focus on basically the 80s and 90s. And we kind of wrestled with that, when we wanted to do a Nickelodeon origin doc, what do we focus on here? And it was really once we started doing some research and we found out about Geraldine Laybourne, that's when that helped us focus up the doc. Okay, we're going to focus mainly on her tenure there. So yes, it is kind of like a golden years of Nickelodeon doc, but golden years of Nickelodeon could mean different things to a lot of different people. So that's kind of the way we say it. It's about the creation and mainly Geraldine Laybourne's time at the network.
Yeah, that was the thing that was just amazing to me, was that the whole stuff about Geraldine Laybourne. And like, it's the thing that not everybody would necessarily know about how this one woman made the initial set of key decisions that turned it into what it became. And it seems like almost like it was never really supposed to be what she envisioned it to be, and she kind of took it and molded it herself. You know what I mean? Like it was like, actually, I guess I should say it seemed like it was a little unfocused on what it was going to be.
That's a great way to say. Yeah, because we do talk about in the doc the years before her, just to kind of show the contrast of what she did, because hindsight's always 20/20, Nickelodeon's always been there. So it's hard to imagine a world without children's programming, but there was one. And it's hard to imagine Saturday mornings, cartoons only being on Saturday morning. Now you can watch cartoons anytime you want, but it's interesting to think that wasn't always the case. And who were the people, who were the key players that made that happen? And you're absolutely right. Nickelodeon in the film, they refer to them as the green vegetables years. And they were Nickelodeon. They didn't have the orange logo yet. They didn't have that kind of irreverent, almost like punk rock attitude that they got. They didn't have that, and it was really kind of just like a mini, like a PBS imitation is really what it was in the early years.
Yeah, because when it first came on, I was like, I think I was like 15 or so, and so it was. I remember my cousins who were younger. Was like, I was aware of it because of that, but I loved the like the kind of green vegetables analogy, because that's what it was. Is it was like, it was good for you, but it wasn't any fun, really. It
was not fun at all. Yeah. Kids did not want it, and that's the other thing. Nickelodeon was, when Geraldine Laybourne took over, Nickelodeon was failing. Like, it was on its way out the door, and she took it over and completely changed it, completely revolutionized it, and made it, what it was. So that was one part of the film I really I loved working on, because there was no nostalgia in it for me. I was researching a time that I don't even remember. The earliest memories I have of Nickelodeon, which are going to be older than a lot of people that watch the movie, because I'm a little bit older. I think that a lot of the people that watch it was, you can't do that on television. That's one of the earliest things I remember. And that was the first show where they found their groove. So the shows that were before that and all of that stuff, we talk about this thing called Cube. I didn't know anything about that until we started doing the documentary. So that was really fun, because there was no nostalgia there. I was just learning new things. I was having to actually, work and learn, and it was fun. I'm fascinated with bizarre 80s technologies, 80s, 90s, 70s, everything that didn't work out. Like, I love reading about the history of like Laserdisc or Beta, Betamax, things that like didn't work out, or the Commodore 64. And that's what Cube was. And I think people who are into that kind of bizarre, weird, oddity, technology stuff will get a kick out of the first chapter, where we talk about this weird thing that was billed as television of the future called Cube.
Yeah, and it was the first stab at interactive TV, but it was it was almost like a glorified call-in TV show, sort of.
Exactly.
That was weird, because it seems like it was only in that one test market in Ohio, because I certainly don't remember ever hearing about it.
Correct. It was only Columbus, Ohio, where that existed.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, I remember when I was growing up in the Bay Area, in San Francisco Bay Area, there was on one of the local channels, like Channel 2, that just serviced most of the Bay Area, they had an afternoon program called, like, it changed names over the years, but for a while it was called POW. And they basically had a host, and he had an Intellivision video game system, and kids would call in and they would like tell him what to do, and he would control it, and there was a monitor behind him. So if it was like a shooting game, they would have to say pow whenever they wanted him to shoot. And so he would just be sitting there, and it was sort of interactive TV, but it was it was, as a kid who was a video game kid, it was super frustrating. It was super frustrating to watch.
I could imagine that. And you look at now, there's so much interactive TV, where crazy. American Idol people are using their cell phones to vote people off, and that's what they were trying to do. But this was like the late 70s. The world just wasn't, the world wasn't ready for it. It really was kind of ahead of its time, but that's what ultimately did it in. No big spoiler alert. You'll still get a kick out of watching the Cube section. It's just really funny.
Yeah, and then like it turned out that the show that the thing that became Nickelodeon kind of started as a program on that Cube, and then it kind of grew out of that because it was I think they could see that it was a bigger idea than just this one little market, and it kind of grew from there. I think for me, I must have been 20 or 21. I had all three of my kids before I was 25, and I had my first one when I was 19. So when my oldest one was 2 or 3, and my middle one was born and 1 year old, was when Nickelodeon became a thing that was on my TV all the time. And that was right when the first batch of original programming came out. Hey Dude, Salute Your Shorts. Clarissa Explains It All. And I went to school for animation way back in the day when it was all drawn by hand, cell by cell. And so, I could kind of passively watch the live scripted shows and be like, this is like, it's good kids entertainment. It's like, sitcom stuff. But the Nicktoons were, for me, the first 3 were Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy. And those were, those became my favorite TV shows. Like, regardless of network, I lived for those Nicktoons. And in particular, I was already a fan of and knew of John Cristofalusi from being, in the animation schooling a little bit. And so from the stuff that he did with Mighty Mouse and all the trouble he got into. And then little did we know that was the least of the trouble John Kay was going to get into in his life.
Right?
But Ren and Stimpy, like, that was one of those like life-changing things for me. It was so not for kids. And somehow they managed to put it on a kids network as a kids cartoon. But just those cartoons were fantastic. Like, Doug was just such a sweet, really good-natured character, and watching your film and getting to see the creator of that show, and just to see that it was no surprise to me that he was kind of that guy too.
He is Doug. That's what everyone says. The guy, Jim Jenkins, he created it, and he basically is Doug in real life.
Yeah. The Nicktoon stuff was really cool for me, and I do remember as the network grew and they started having success with the scripted shows, that I watched more and more of that stuff, and like things like All That was a good TV show, and I don't think it was a good TV show for kids. I think it was a good TV show. You know what I mean? And I think that they had a bunch of those. Clarissa was a good TV show. And they had a lot of that stuff. And maybe the thing that needed to be pointed out a little bit more in regards to Clarissa that you guys go over in the film is she was kind of intentionally like a feminist role model. But you didn't really realize it. She wasn't trying to be a princess. She was really an individual thinking person. And I thought that was really cool to have them to have the people in your movie that were creating the content at the time, like kind of come out and be like, yeah, well, you know, this was an important thing for us to do. I thought that was super rad.
It's cool too that they did it in such an organic way that it didn't feel as though anyone was preaching to you, because I loved Clarissa whenever I was a kid. You know, I'm a couple of years younger than Melissa Joan Hart, so I was the target age for it when it came out, and I didn't feel like the TV was telling me, you know, respect women or something like. They did it in such an organic way that definitely helped, I think, the generation break down some gender roles. You know, that girls are not these. You don't have to watch My Little Pony. You don't have to be sitting by the phone waiting for the boy to call. You know, what was that board game that they would always advertise for girl, where they'd pick up the phone, like date night or something like that, where they'd pick up the phone and be like, Johnny's calling you. He's ready for the date. You know, that I think it helped. I think that helped shape that generation be more progressive, but they didn't even know it. You know, they were able to talk to kids in a way that was authentic and real. And I think that's amazing. And Mitch...
No, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Well, no, I was just going to say Mitchell Kriegman, to your other point, the writer or creator of Clarissa. And it's funny what multiple writers who never worked together, they all kind of said the same thing. And Mitchell of Clarissa said this, that they never treated writing their kids' shows any different than they treated writing a show that was aimed at adults. You know, a lot of people might be like, oh, this is for kids. You don't have to bring your A game. Oh, if there's some plot holes or crappy characterization, and there's really no character arcs, it doesn't matter. This is just for kids. Just fart something out, you know? And they never did that. They treated it with the same respect that they would a show that was aimed at adults. And I think that's, like, to your point, like what you said, it didn't, that's why it felt real and why kids appreciated it, was because someone was actually giving it their all. You know, go figure.
Right. And that was one of the things where with the Hey Dude, when they were talking to those writers, and they were like, you know what? These were regular TV writers. They weren't noobs or people we brought in to give their first chance. It was like, these are people who wrote television. So they were writing real television shows. And I remember at the time really liking that show too. At it's like, I think of it as like a first block of 6, like the 3 Nicktoons and the 3 first scripted shows and like all that stuff was really good. Salute Your Shorts was really good. It was really funny.
It was great. Yeah.
And you know, the kids that they cast were skilled. There was never any like, and then like, you know, as you like, the stuff that came after where you guys leave off, you know, that was stuff that my daughter watched more after, you know, she was kind of doing things on her own, and I didn't have to keep an eye on what she was watching. And
got it.
There was a lot of those shows that were like, I mean, a whole nother level above that even, you know what I mean? Like it was crazy. That network has put out so much amazing content over the years, and then you got that second set of Nicktoons that was like Rocko's Modern Life and Cat Dog, Angry Beavers, and all that stuff that was
Real Monsters,
and the Thornberries, all that stuff. And I had moved down to LA around 95, and the company that I was at was a Virgin owned company, and I was kind of the animator there, and I handled all the animation software and any of the 2D animation projects, because this was kind of before 3D animation was like the first Toy Story was like the first 3D animated movie. Everything else was kind of still done in 2D, but one of the things that we did around there a lot was what we would call the Dog and Pony Show, where like super famous people or powerful people in kids media in general would come through. And, you know, we were a bunch of like these punk rock guys, green hair and shit, in this little room who created all the creative. And so they would bring everybody down through, and like we'd be listening to, you know, Slayer or whatever. And so all these like really big
cool.
animation people would come through, like Chris Falusi, like Jim Davis from Garfield, and like all these people. But at one point, the entirety of Klasky Chupo, like top brass people, came through to see what we were doing. And Klasky Chupo, for people who don't know, was the company that did Rugrats, Monsters, Thornberries.
Yeah. And one thing people don't know about them is that they were the original people that did The Simpsons back when it was on the Tracy Ullman show.
Yeah, when
which
it
is
was
crazy. Like,
super
there
weird.
Was this, yeah, it was super weird. Like, whenever it became its own show, they were like, nah, we're not going to do that. And you think that's going to like blow their career. Oh, you blew it, you know. But then they went on to do Rugrats and all these other amazing shows. So it was
Rocket
really
Power and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
But the one thing that I got to work a lot on of theirs was like a show that didn't do well at all. It was called Santo Bagito. And it was like this little, it was all these bugs that lived in this little Mexican village. And I don't remember if it was a Nickelodeon show or if it was a network show or whatever, but it was, I thought it was very good. And so I actually got to spend a little time around Gabber, Chupo and those people. And they were all really super nice. Cool. And just like every day, going back and forth to work, I had to drive past their animation studio on La Brea.
It looks so cool.
Yeah. So that is a little bit of my connection on a professional level to Nickelodeon, but yeah. So one of the things also that I thought was really cool is that they talked to a lot of the stars of the TV shows. The guys from Pete and Pete. And, the all that people, a lot of Mark Summers with the Double Dare.
Cause he's such a cool dude.
That show was, if the first 6 original programming things weren't the catalyst for that network, it had to have been Double Dare for sure. What a great
Double
show.
Dare. I mean, fantastic show, and that show, the shows that we chose to focus on, because Nickelodeon had so many shows, we could only focus on ones that kind of changed the game. And Double Dare absolutely changed Nickelodeon. I mean, you can see they took the green slime and stuff from You Can't Do That on Television. Double Dare. Oh my gosh, I've as a kid, I wanted to be on that show. I wanted to get my family. They had Family Double Dare. I always wanted my family to be on. And then you had to get to meet Mark Summers. That was almost like getting to meet like Pee Wee Herman, or he's totally at that level. If you're that age, it's like LeVar Burton, Pee Wee Herman, Hulk Hogan. Those are the people that like were like your idols as a kid. Sure. So I mean, getting to meet Mark Summers was pretty dang fun. Yeah, just watching the evolution of that show from an idea to the pilot to the first episode to full production was really cool. And again, like for people in the 25 to 35 age group, they're gonna absolutely love. They're gonna love seeing all this stuff. It for me, it's like I was like watching it and I was like, oh, this is super cool, especially learning about Geraldine. And then when it got to like all of that stuff, I was like, I got excited. I was like, oh God, I totally remember that. And it was like all this stuff that I had forgotten when it was brand new. You know what I mean? When it came out and it was brand new, there was nothing like it. There was no other kids network. There was no Disney. There was Disney Channel. There was none of that stuff. And right.
Yeah, I found myself getting super excited as it went on to see. I was like, God, I forgot how great Pete and Pete was. Like the Adventures of Pete and Pete was such a weird and cool show. Like the fact that they put that stuff out and there's a whole generation of kids who grew up on things like Carissa Explains It All, which was totally unique for what it was, and shows like The Adventures of Pete and Pete, which was such a strange show, but it was so amazing. And I think there's probably a whole bunch of kids who were positively influenced to be creative type of people because they were exposed to something so weird like that. That was so great at the same time. Yeah, you're absolutely right, because it kind of has that like,
Pete and Pete has an aesthetic that holds up. That's like cool even now. You know, it's got that kind of almost like a Wes Anderson type feel, but also kind of like a David Lynch feel at the same time. Like, it's just very bizarre. And they had all those, all those musical guests or they weren't on there as their music persona, but they were all these famous, Deborah Harry, Michael Stipe, Iggy Pop, David Johansen of New York Dolls. It's crazy how many like cool bands made performances on that show, or made appearances on that show.
Yeah, and I totally had forgotten about that. Like, I had forgotten all those people were on that show, and it just made it even cooler. I was like, how cool is it that Debbie Harry was on?
I know.
Was on the Adventures of Pete and Pete. And the other thing that I'd forgotten about the Adventures of Pete and Pete that is very Lynch, like David Lynch, like it was the little Pete's tattoo, like and the fact that it's never discussed. Where
it's
it
never
came
discussed
from,
how
an 8-year-old kid got a tattoo of a half naked lady, and they put that on a kids network. So
on a kids
amazing.
Network. Yeah, like, did he get kidnapped or what the heck happened? Like, something, no matter how you slice it, something illegal happened. Whether someone gave that to him against his will or with his consent. You cannot tattoo an 8-year-old. Like, you can't do that. That's illegal. So yeah, that you're right. Like, it's crazy. I mean, I love that show. Are You Afraid of the Dark? That was a great show. I think that probably influenced a lot of horror fans. I know it definitely sparked an interest in the horror genre for me. Those episodes were super cool too. And you talk the same thing with you put a show on with an 8-year-old with a tattoo. Are You Afraid of the Dark? The whole point of that show was to scare kids. Like, that's crazy. Hey, we're going to do a show. It's not meant to comfort or educate or anything like that. The whole point is just to scare little kids. And the fact that somebody was like, yeah, let's greenlight this. Yeah, let's do it.
Dude, totally.
And a lot of those episodes did not end with a happy ending. They were very much like the Twilight Zone, where sometimes the kids ended up trapped in another dimension or with a monster on them, like the kids didn't win all the time. And I thought that was, pretty cool too.
Yeah. When they talked to the creator of that, and he was talking about that whole thing of like, well, what do kids like to do? They like to tell horror stories and or stories around scary stories around the campfire. And they went through that whole, you guys go through that whole part of like how it became one thing and ended up as being, Are You Afraid of the Dark? And I remember watching that with my cousins who were like probably 13 or 14. Because, one of the other things that was that wasn't obvious, that hadn't occurred to me also until I watched your movie, was how they were really smart about branding different blocks of time in a specific way. So there was the Are You Afraid of the Dark stuff was on SNICK, which was Saturday Night Nick. And they could, and it was like almost like telling the parents that, okay, this isn't for the little kids, this is for the older kids. Yeah. And then they had Nick Jr. that was clearly for the younger kids. And and they broke the entire thing up so well into like almost subconscious blocks of time. Yeah. They gave them a little name, and that was all you needed to know about what it was.
Yeah.
And I think, as I was saying before, that when my kids became a certain age is when I became aware of Nickelodeon for what it was. But my introduction to Nickelodeon was Nick at Night, because I would watch those shows when I was like in art school. I would have the TV on, and I would be working on drawing assignments and watching like Car 54 and The Munsters and Patty Duke Show and all these old black and white reruns, Mr. Ed and all those shows. And so that would have been like 88 probably or so. And then within a couple years, like they sorted it out. And I think Nick at Night is its own channel now, isn't it?
It might be. It's weird because now Nick at Night plays like Friends and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, they of course, because they gotta reach the relevant audience,
Right, because it's genius, because it's always what the adults of the kids that watch Nickelodeon liked. So kids in the 80s, our parents grew up in the 50s and 60s, so they were playing, and now all the kids are they're playing like 90s and 2000 shows. It's pretty genius because at the time, and I wish we could have gone into this more in the film, But we were so focused on the programming that they made.
Sure.
But Nick at Night was genius because they originally shared that space with the arts and entertainment. So at 9:00, Nickelodeon became arts and entertainment, or at least a channel that would go on to become arts and entertainment. And then it broke off and became its own thing. So at 9:00, they had nothing to play. They're like, and they didn't want to just go off the air or play like infomercials. So they're like, what can we do that makes sense? We're a kids program, or we're a kids network, but kids are going to be asleep. So what do we do? And also, what do we do without spending a bunch of money, So I think that's really genius that they're like, well, to keep it kind of wholesome or whatever, let's play shows that the parents grew up watching. Right. And they didn't have to pay anything for them, because who else was dying to play Dobie Gillis in 1988, or Car 54, Where Are You in 1980? Nobody wanted those shows, so they could get them for super cheap. And one thing I thought was genius when I talked to Geraldine Laybourne was, when Nickelodeon transitioned into Nick at Night, the first show that they played was Mr. Ed. Mm-hmm. And that was a show about a talking horse. And they did that one first just in case there were any kids that were still awake. They might kind of be into Mr. Ed because there's a horse that talks. I thought that was genius. Like every scene, when you look at Nickelodeon, it's synonymous with slime and that splat, and that's what it feels like. Just like it feels as though it's totally random and it's zany, and they just threw a bunch of stuff at the wall. That's what it looks like. And to find out that it's not, that it was highly, it was very meticulous and orchestrated, but it doesn't feel that way at all. To me, that's the real genius of Nickelodeon, to feel random and zany, but actually be this almost like mathematical formula.
Totally. And that kind of goes into another part of your film that was really interesting to me as a graphic designer, and will definitely be very interesting to my audience there's a lot. We have a big piece of the design community is regular viewers and guests on this show. So that whole thing where they talk about the logo, the creation of the logo, creation of the typeface, the rules around all of that branding, and they give you the Pantone orange color, like hard nerd design stuff. That was super. That I was I was folding laundry, and during that whole part, I realized I'd been holding the same shirt for 5 minutes, watching the whole part about the branding of Nickelodeon in the beginning part, and I was like, that was absolutely fantastic.
Yes.
And just. I won't give up too many spoilers, but there's a direct tie to how MTV was branded. And they just kind of took those same rules and applied them to little kids instead of bigger kids. And I'll kind of leave it off there because people are going to want to. Yeah. I mean, my audience is going to be very excited to watch that whole branding part. It's fantastic.
We got to look at the book that they had that was only for Nickelodeon employees, and we kind of show it real quick in there where it had to be that one Pantone orange. You cannot change that orange at all. You couldn't change that. It's I think it's called Balloon, the font. But other than that, you could make it whatever shape you wanted. But I thought it was funny. The only rules were it couldn't be something that actually would be orange in the real world. You couldn't have it be an orange, but you could have it be an orange or something like that. It had to be something that like a blimp or a splat or whatever. Or there were some of them they show a snake. You could make it whatever you wanted. I thought that was pretty genius, Yeah.
And as a person who was watching the channel through my kids, I always loved how creative the bumpers were, because I was an animator and I was involved in the animation industry, and it was always really cool animations. There was one, and you guys show it in the film, of this little blobby guy walking, and he would trip, and then he would morph into another object.
Yes.
And I remember just being blown away by how cool that was at the time. And the other
Yeah.
thing about that whole section, and it was kind of a thing that started when you guys went into the original programming stuff, was how immediately the old jingles like came right back, like Nick,
Right.
Nick. Like I was like,
Nick.
oh
Yep.
my God, I have not heard that in 30 years. And it's like, ding. I like immediately was like, yeah. And there was like all of those jingles, and then all those the Nickelodeon like logo bumpers and stuff like that. That part of the movie was so cool, because it's like, it's one of those things where you get that rush of like nostalgia where it's like, I totally forgot about that.
And it kind of shows you how powerful those were. And that's kind of what we wanted to do when we would play those. Like whether it was that Nick, or that, aren't you glad you got your Nick? Or the other was like, oh, Nick. You know, all of those were buried, and it's like, oh my God, this has been in my brain this whole time, and I didn't even know it.
And they come right to the surface.
They come right back. And that's one thing that I think there's a guy in the film, Scott Webb, and he was in charge of a lot of those. Because originally, a lot of younger people might not remember this, but the whole point of cable was going to be that there were no commercials. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, cable, right? It didn't go that way for very long.
We got gypped.
But that was the whole point, you know? You pay money to get cable, but the upside is you don't have to sit through those commercials. So originally, the whole reason they did those bumpers was because they didn't have any commercials. Nickelodeon didn't have any commercials. So they're like, let's make our own commercials. And the whole point of them was to help reinforce their brand, reinforce what Nick was. Because that's one thing that I think is interesting that you don't see a lot, is like, when I was a kid, I just wanted to watch Nickelodeon. I had my favorite shows on there, and there were probably a couple I didn't like, but I didn't really care. It was like Nickelodeon was the destination. I just wanted to turn it to Nickelodeon. Whereas now, I don't think that's the case. Like, kids will be like, I want to watch Octonauts, or I want to watch whatever that one show is. It's not like, I want to watch this one channel. It's just like they have their own show. And that's what I think they did. Nickelodeon as a whole had its own vibe, everything. And that's from the logo to the bumpers to the commercials to the shows, most importantly, it had a feel that was unified. And it did not feel like Disney at all. You know, you turn on Salute Your Shorts and then you flip over to the Disney Channel, there's nothing that's the same. Whereas now, you know, when I have two little kids, and they're 9 and 10, so I guess they're not that little anymore. But when they watch shows, it's mainly on Netflix or some. I have no idea who produced it. It could be a Nickelodeon show. It could be a Disney Channel show. It could be a Netflix show. They're all kind of, and I don't mean this in a bad way, because some of these shows are really wonderful, but they don't have their own feeling. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I totally get that. And that was one of the things that the whole Geraldine Laybourne stuff was like, just like her vision, like her overriding vision of where that directed that whole focus of it. And that was really super amazing to see all that stuff. And then, you know, you guys kind of get into like, you know, when they took up residence at Universal Orlando, and, you know, all that stuff. And like when it, you know, it's that whole philosophy almost of fake it till you make it, where they're like, we don't have the money to have our own facility, so let's figure out how we can get one anyway, you know. And then it, you know, you a reoccurring kind of theme on this show is that you have to keep doing what you do constantly until it just becomes what it is that you do. And that was kind of like what Nickelodeon did, but they're like, well, we're just going to keep moving forward until we get to where we want to go. That was pretty interesting, because I think in my mind, because I was in LA from 95, and you know, they had studios here, and I guess it didn't really occur to me that they had that Florida was the first where everything was at first.
Yes. Yeah, Florida was everything. They were essentially trying to make a a rival to Disney World, where all their shows were made. They wanted all their shows to be made there, and then they also kids could come visit and kind of like
Huge.
they could you could watch shows being made, and then you could also like go be a part of like there was interactive stuff where you could get slimed. It was pretty genius, and it is a bummer, because it's still there. But it's something else now. For a while there, it was the Blue Man Group, and now I don't even know what it is, but it's painted all differently. But it's just weird that it's still there. And one of the mysteries is they put a time capsule back in the 90s in the ground there. And now that it's not Nickelodeon, they moved it once to like a hotel. And then now that hotel's not even there. So everyone's like, where the hell is that time capsule? No one really knows. Even we asked Geraldine Laybourne that, and she was like, yeah, you know what? We've got this movie, so that's kind of my time capsule. But yeah, it was just kind of like, I'm sure they'll find it, but that's one of the biggest mysteries. Is like, where is the time capsule?
Dude, totally. That's amazing. Like I hope they find it, and I hope that
Me too.
I hope it's just full of slime, and they dump it on somebody's head.
It'll probably have like some of those jams. Remember that they called them hammer pants, but they were like jams. I'm sure they had like a fanny pack in there, maybe some pogs. I don't know.
A bunch of phloem.
Yeah, phloem.
Yeah, like one of the, kind of related to that. They talk a lot about what it was like. The actors who were part of all the shows talk about what it was like to constantly have eyes on you while you're trying to do your damn job, which I can imagine must have been a nightmare for everybody
that
involved.
Would suck,
Yeah, because
I used to work at a coffee shop. Oh, go ahead.
My wife does hair in film and TV, and
yeah.
I don't know if she would want to even take a job where she had to be on camera all the time. She's been on jobs before where they're like ask her if she's cool with being on camera, and she's like, I don't want to get into all this.
Because at the end of the day, you're adults, even though you're gonna go perform for kids, but you're still a grown up, and you have to constantly watch what you say. Yeah, I was gonna mention I worked at a coffee shop for a while, and you're making lattes and stuff, and people are looking at you like, are you putting a sprinkle of cinnamon on top? Or like, always like looking at you, making sure you're doing it. It's like, that was annoying for me, and that's so small compared to what they went to. I can only imagine how annoying that would be to, do hair and makeup. One thing goes wrong, and you want to be like, fuck, but you can't say that because you're, being watched.
Totally. I every now and then I'll do like a live painting thing where I go out and like paint stuff and people watch, and I'm not a super huge fan of that either. Just having somebody over your shoulder watching what you're doing.
No.
Kind of in that same area of the film, they start going into the show, all that, and that whole cast and how they got cast on that show. And it becomes really apparent really fast how many of those kids became like stars, like that are still stars. I mean, Kenan Thompson is the longest running member of Saturday Night Live ever. And he started on that show on Nickelodeon.
Yeah,
and
crazy.
Yeah. Well, I guess he'd already done the Mighty Ducks, so I wouldn't say he started there, but
that's a good point.
Where he became who he became. Like a lot of them. And I didn't realize that what's that? Christine Taylor, is that her name? Ben Stiller's.
Christine Taylor.
Started on the very first Hey Dude, the very first Nickelodeon show, and she's a major star now too, and it's like
big star, yeah.
All these kids and people who got kind of started on Nickelodeon that became staples of the entertainment industry. That's super cool. There was a lot of stuff like that in your movie that was like that, where I was like, damn, I didn't even think about it like that. Like what a huge impact that network had, or this show had, or this actor had. And the big granddaddy of them all, of course, I think the biggest thing that network ever produced was SpongeBob. Like SpongeBob is he's Mickey Mouse. He is Scooby-Doo.
That's exactly
he's
it.
Bugs Bunny. He's like in the top 5 all time
of all time.
characters,
Yep.
cartoon characters. And, he's so ubiquitous in American culture that it didn't even occur to me that he was a Nickelodeon creation until I was watching your movie. And I was like, oh my God, that's right. SpongeBob came from Nickelodeon. That's insane. Right?
SpongeBob. I mean, that at that point, and that's kind of that's sort of where we end off. Because at that point, the moment that they created SpongeBob, they were on par with everybody else, if not ahead of. I mean, like you said, he is up there with Mickey Mouse. When you ask young kids what they like, he is right up there. And the thing that I think is awesome about SpongeBob is he wasn't created any different than any of the other Nicktoons, like Ren and Stimpy. There wasn't. They didn't plan for what happened to happen at all. They were just making another show, It was just as innocent and pure as Rugrats, Doug, Ren and Stimpy, all of those shows. That, for whatever reason, that one just absolutely took off. And then it was kind of after that people, I think they've been chasing that ever since. Like, they want to recreate the successes. There's no time to make a Pete and Pete when you can make another. Let's find another SpongeBob, which is fine. Which is fine. And I mean, hey, Nickelodeon does some awesome stuff to this very day. And that's one thing that we're kind of careful to say in the film is we're not trying to say that it's better. It's just different. It's a different game now. Once you've made a SpongeBob, you can never go back to being that quaint, small, little cutting edge thing. You can't. Even if you want to, you can't. It's like Green Day going back to 924 Gilman Street. They can go there, but they'll never be that band. They can't,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, my old band, we used to play at Gilman back in the 80s.
Thank you for getting that reference.
did a show with pre-Green Day and Operation Ivy.
Wow.
And so, that was interesting. Interesting times, because I grew up in the Bay Area and the punk scene in the Bay Area, so I spent a lot of hours of my life in 924 Gilman.
Yeah, I knew. I remember you saying you were from the Bay Area, and I was like, I'm gonna throw out a Gilman Street reference. I'm sure he'll get it. Yeah.
Actually, my last band that I left 10 years ago, we did a show at Gilman. It was the first time I'd played a show at Gilman in like 15 or 20 years, and that was also super fun. It was like, God, it's still the same damn place.
That's awesome. I got to play there once, or like late 90s, early 2000s, and I was blown away because, we were this band from Texas, that had, I mean, there was no draw there. We might have had like 2 or 3 friends that lived in the Bay Area that came to see us, and we got paid more than we got paid like when we were back at home. They're like, well, we do this whole thing where it's based on how many people you draw in, but also how far you came. And we're like, wow, like that's legit. That's for real.
What band were you in?
I was just in this like pop punk band, like a very small Texas pop punk band back then. It's
all right.
Another lifetime. I wasn't good. That's why I didn't continue down that path, because I realized I was rather talentless when it came to music.
Yeah, that's not for you to decide, my friend. The rest of us decide if it was any good or not.
Well, I did get to record a song for this movie, though.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like to say that I love the most about getting to make a very small independent film like this is you get to be involved in all facets of it. Whatever you want to be involved in, you can be involved in, because, it was just us that made this film. And for the Pete and Pete section, I wanted a lot of music that kind of sounded very 90s.
Sure.
Dinosaur Jr., Super Chunk, that kind of stuff. And there was a guy, and we'll have to get into this because I hope you liked it. The animation in our movie, the guy that animated it, me and him were in a band back in the 90s that kind of wanted to sound like that. And I was like, hey, can we record a song for the Pete and Pete section? Because I have this idea I was editing it, and I knew what kind of music I wanted. So I was like, let me just go do it. So we rented some studio time. And whenever we talk about Artie, the part where we start talking about Artie, the strongest man in the world, that's me and our animator playing awesome. That song. So that was, what a delight that was to get to just record some music for the film.
That's excellent. I'm going to go back and watch now just for that. Everybody be on the lookout. That whole scene, when the show was on and when Artie has to leave Pete, was I mean, it was touching in the show, and it was cool that you guys kind of spotlighted that. And I cannot for the life of me ever remember the name of the guy who played Artie, but he's been in a million other things since. And every single time I ever see him, that's who he is to me. He's not
Artie.
Not the actor. His name's Toby something.
Toby Huss.
Yeah. Toby Huss. And it's like, I see him and stuff. He was in *Halt and Catch Fire*, and he was in *Glow*. And I'm like, no, man, that's Artie, the strongest man in the world.
He was on these MTV bumpers.
Oh, those were the best when he was Sinatra.
He was like Sinatra.
He was drunk
you
Sinatra.
may have killed my father, Mr. Mussolini, but you shall never kill me. Like he was, and he was singing like I think like Alanis Morissette or something, but like in a Sinatra voice.
Yeah.
Like oh my god, so silly,
so good. And I'm a huge Frank Sinatra fan, and at the time I remember thinking that those were so hilarious. Because he just nailed
*Halt
it.
and Catch Fire*. He's singing it. He's kind of doing that character in one episode. One episode of *Halt and Catch Fire*, he starts out singing a Sinatra song, and it's like, oh, he's doing the thing from MTV back in the day. Because he does a pretty good, Sinatra sounding voice.
Yes, of course. And and at the time he was doing those, he looked enough like Sinatra.
He looked
from the
enough like
'60s that you put him in that hat and that lighting, and it was a dead on.
Yeah,
that was amazing. Yeah, and another thing, whenever I have somebody on that has a project, I always kind of go down the rabbit hole and like research what they've done, what they've, and then I like, and I'm reading about Nickelodeon, and then I go down the rabbit hole of like this actor and what have they done since and all that stuff. And I was saying like a lot of those kids from all that, that went on to do other stuff. Like I had totally forgotten that Kel has like a career. Like, I only ever think of him as a guy from Good Burger, but he's done a lot of stuff too. And that whole Good Burger stuff, like just the fact that it came from a skit and then got its own show and then got its own movie. And I know when my kids were growing up, the Good Burger voice, the voice that Kel did, the Surfer Dude voice, that was like a voice that was the amount of voices that were done in my household growing up from characters from Nickelodeon shows, whether it was like one of the big ones for my family, for my kids and my family, even though my boys were teenagers and were a little bit aged out of Nickelodeon, was like Rocket Power, which you guys didn't really get too far into. Like even now, there's like certain sayings from Rocket Power episodes that we still say to each other, even though they're like grown adults. And like Rocko's Modern Life was another huge show. And just, I think if you take, going back to SpongeBob a little bit, I think if you take Ren and Stimpy and you take Rocko's Modern Life and you stick them together, I think you end up with SpongeBob. And,
I agree.
And I seem to remember at some point reading the whole Wikipedia about SpongeBob like a while ago, and that it was like one of those like happy accidents for the creator of that show. And when you watch it, it's just as weird as Ren and Stimpy, and it's just as oddly subversive as Ren and Stimpy, but it's also just as sweet as Rocko is, and his relationship with Heifer and all that.
Yep, you're right.
And it's it's like, it's not a huge surprise it was as big, because if you raise a generation on Ren and Stimpy and then Rocko, and then you give them SpongeBob, you're gonna get what you got. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. Yeah, and SpongeBob uses that technique that the first time I ever saw it, I think that Ren and Stimpy popularized it. It had been used before, but that whole technique of, you have just typical animation, but then you go in for a close-up and it's a painting, and the painting is like super detailed and super gross. That was a lot on Ren and Stimpy, and they do that a lot on SpongeBob too. You can see the influence.
I worked with some people who had worked on Ren and Stimpy in my first job in LA, and those were called gross out shots, and And they were like, it was like one of those things where like they just like chuck them when they were done with them. Like nobody thought to like keep them.
Keep it. Yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, you hear about like the old Warner Brothers Bugs Bunny cartoons or the old Disney, and like they would just like line the hallways of the offices with the cells and like slip and slide down them and then just like throw them all away. And it's like they had no idea that they're going to be worth so much money.
Yeah.
You know, 70 years
so
later.
Much for that.
And so you hear stuff like that about like, you know, the like the Ren and Stimpy stuff. And I'm just such a huge
I have a cell.
fan.
I got one cell off of this of Ren and Stimpy.
Oh, nice.
And it's pretty cool. So that's one of my prized possessions from this adventure.
That's amazing. The only cell I have, which is amazing as a traditionally trained animator, is I have a. You remember the Jerky Boys?
Oh yeah.
Remember they made a Jerky Boys movie?
I do remember the movie. Yeah.
The intro was animated, 2D cell animated, and I have the color call out cell of Frank Rizzo. And so it's just a cell of him screaming into a phone, and it's got all the, you know, red number 72. And so I have this color call out cell for all the cell painters to use. That is like one of my prized possessions.
That's funny. Me and Adam, my co-director on this, we wanted to be the Jerky Boys bad back then. We would make just like little tapes of us prank calling people, and then we would try to like sell them and stuff or just give them away. But we just weren't funny. That was what we were missing. It was just us like prank calling people and stuff. But
that totally kind of goes into like a side story I have about a bunch of stuff we just talked about. Was that the guys that I was working with from the animation industry at Virgin, they had worked on a bunch of these shows and they knew a bunch of these people. And on Rocko's Modern Life, the turtle character, whose name I cannot remember off the top of my head, he just used Saul Rosenberg's voice. Like it was just Saul Rosenberg, right? And I could do a dead on Saul Rosenberg at the time because I was so into the Jerky Boys. And so one of the guys I worked with had Mr. Lawrence's phone number, who was the guy who did the voice of that character. And and so he gave me the number, and at work one day I called Doug Lawrence as Saul Rosenberg and started hassling him about stealing my voice for his turtle character. And I, you know, the whole thing, oh God, and I can't believe you did this to me. Oh, I'm suing you and everybody. And like I did it, and he was like, he was dying laughing. He's like, who is this? And like my friend who gave me the number was like jumped on and was like, we got you, Lawrence. And it was like a whole thing. It was hilarious.
A different time. The closest you can do, like, you can't prank call people anymore, but I love it whenever like scammers, you know, people that try to scam you and stuff, when they call me, I always have fun with those guys. And I always kind of invoke the Jerky Boys in my mind, just take them for a ride.
Jerky Boys just put out a new record. Did you know that?
I had no idea.
They do. They did. And because like I was like, how are they going to do that in this day and with this technology? But they were smart. They just called like helplines and hotlines for like, customer service lines and stuff, and just gave them a ration of shit. It works pretty good. It's very funny.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, the Orange Years comes out on the 17th of November.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm planning on launching this episode the week before. So if you are listening or watching, it'll be out a week from today on all of your favorite streaming services, correct? Like I think I saw it's available on Amazon Prime,
iTunes, and Amazon. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And I think people are gonna really love it. It was really well made, and you hit all the right notes to get the little dopamine hits that are gonna keep people super interested in it. from the beginning to the end. But one of the things when I was saying that, like, I go down the research rabbit hole, your next movie, if you want to talk anything about it at all, what are you up to next? Because it's definitely down my alley for sure.
Oh, yeah. If you're a music fan or an art fan, you'll really like it. I'm working on a documentary about the band Gwar. And I use the term band loosely because Gwar really, as we've I've got to know them and research them. They're really, to call them a band is really not correct. They're like a performance art project.
Oh yeah, they're their own culture almost.
Yeah, they are the artists in the beginning. It was the artists that were the band, that were the group, and the band members could come and go as they please because it was mainly about the artists. And there are people that are in Gwar that don't actually play instruments. I'm fascinated by that. Like they're kind of known as a metal band for sure. Even though they're kind of more like Spinal Tap, they're kind of, or Beavis and Butthead. They're celebrating heavy metal while also kind of poking fun at it.
Sure,
but
the best bands do.
Right? Yeah. But their ethos is so punk because
I think they came from the Richmond
totally big time. Yeah. And their ethos of DIY, like, you think about a DIY band where you're just moving guitar, bass, drums. Think about that, but with this whole elaborate stage show, the passion those guys have to move all of that night after night. They play every single night, setting that whole thing up because they're doing a little mini play essentially every night.
Yeah.
And they got to get there at like 10 in the morning and set all that stuff up and then do the show. I think people are going to really, even people that already, what I wanted to do is make a documentary for people that maybe only heard about them in Empire Records. Remember that movie in the 90s?
Yeah.
Even people
totally.
that have only maybe like have kind of heard of Gwar will like it. And then also people that are like hardcore into Gwar will also like it. And everything in between, where if you kind of know about them, but you'll learn a lot more. And we just wrapped filming that.
Oh, nice.
They Gwar just had a big concert where like a lot of the original members came back and stuff, and we were able to film that, and it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. Like, those guys are just some of the, kind of like Nickelodeon, as weird as it is to say, comparing Gwar and Nickelodeon. Those guys are some of the coolest, most hardworking guys I've ever met my entire life.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely went from the punk scene into the metal scene, and like kind of around the time when Gwar was doing their thing. I was actually just talking about this with somebody right before I came on, where it was like, I was one of those first generation hardcore punk kids from the early 80s. And then, by the mid 80s, all of those hardcore bands were, two things was happening. Either they were slowing down and playing like more pop influenced music, or they were turning into like crossover, like thrash bands. And so it was a really easy buy-in for me to go from hardcore punk to metal, because I just wanted to stay with all the bands that were playing fast. And so I just went along with that. And it was like Anthrax, Exodus, Metallica, Venom, Slayer, Possessed, all those first wave of thrash bands. It was like, well, these bands are all playing faster than the hardcore bands, so this is where I'm going to go. And and that's always been, that's like kind of my, the theme of my life is the faster you can play music, the more I like it. So I went right into grindcore, like right after that. Like, keep playing it. If you can go faster, I'm gonna listen.
Let's do it.
Yeah. And I remember Gwar came along, and I want you to come back when you have your Gwar movie out and talk about your Gwar movie. So I don't want to go too far down the Gwar alley on this one.
Yeah.
But it took them a little while to get good enough as a band for me to like them enough to listen to them. Like, it was one thing to go see them because it was a show,
right?
And it didn't matter what they sounded like, but they weren't a particularly great band in the beginning to me, or they weren't doing, I guess, what I was looking forward to doing. And then over the years, they became a legitimately good metal band. And so I would say that they're not a band that I listen to frequently, but there was a time where I was like, I didn't even really want to hear them because it was like, I just want to see them. And,
you want to see the show. Yeah.
Yeah. And as it pertains a little bit to my group of friends, they started kind of taking out the band. Oh my God, I just had a brain fart. Ghoul. Ghoul started going out with them, and Ghoul kind of became their like a similar project. And I have several friends that are in the band Ghoul, and I've done a bunch of shirt work for them and stuff.
Oh,
and
really?
I love Ghoul. And so
yeah, you know the guy Scott in that band?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
He does some stuff with Gwar sometimes.
Yeah.
Like he will run their like spew and stuff. He's a super cool. I've got to meet him a couple times. He's a great guy.
Dude, totally. All those guys are the nicest guys and the most insanely talented musicians. And then like they're also in other bands that are, you know, it's like they're all in my little circle of friends. And it's funny, what my guest for this week is guitar player named Leon Del Muerte, who is
okay.
He sings for the band Impaled that has 2 members of Ghoul in that band.
Okay.
And then another member of Ghoul who's also an Impaled is also an Exhumed, which Leon and one of my other best friends, Matt Harvey, is in. And it's like, so they're all, the Ghoul is like totally part of my little group of friends. And not to go too far down that alley, when they put out their last record, they made it onto the Billboard charts, which was just to me was just absolutely insane. And I was so proud of them, and they deserve it completely because their stage show is, while it seems like it might be kind of a less intense version of Gwar, it's every bit as entertaining as that Gwar set. But you're probably not going to go home stained red for a week like you did when you went and saw Gwar back in the day.
Yeah, it's funny. Gwar, you know, they're just so many of the, you know, the core group of musicians, you know, they've been playing together since like 1986, 87. So they're just total badasses. Yeah. And their singer, you know, unfortunately, you know, Dave Brockie passed away a while back, and their singer, Michael Bishop, their current singer, Michael Bishop, who was the original bass player. Mm-hmm. Who came back and he sang in Gwar back in the, so he was a singer in Gwar, because you know Gwar's always had multiple singers.
Sure,
Brockie was the main one, but like, you know, Sly Minster Hyman would sing a song, Beefcake would sing a song, Techno Destructo would sing a song. So he sang like that song. I always like that song, "Cool Place to Park," back in the day, and he's their singer, and he's just got a great set of pipes. Like when I see him, I'm like, damn, like how cool is it? And I love it because Dave had that deep baritone voice, and Bishop's voice is really high. He's a wailer, you know, and he can get way up high. So it's cool that you don't compare him to Brockie, even when he plays like the old Rocky songs. You don't compare him because he's his voice is totally different. And to me, man, they've got the best band they've ever had. There's a guy named Brent Purgason that's their guitar player. He plays in a band called US Bastards, and he's got like a real I'm real into those bands like Zeke and like Motorhead and Helicopters and stuff like that. And he's got a style that really reminds me of that. But he can also do that thrash shit too. And he's just an amazing bass player. And then lead guitar player. And then their bass player, Casey Orr from fucking Rigor Mortis, you know, he's in the band now. So I mean, to me, like when you like their most recent record, Blood of Gods, that to me, I can listen to that front to back. It's just a great record, and I know they needed that record to be good, you know, because everyone was like, oh, without Brock, you need to hang it up, you know,
right?
And that record to me is the answer. No, they got to keep going, you know. And that's one thing I hope we explore in the doc is that, you know, I think it was the right thing for them to do personally. I mean, maybe by the time, you know, we'll wait till the doc comes out. I don't want to give any spoilers, but, you know, they're a collective. They're absolutely a collective. And
for sure. Yeah, for sure they band. Are. When is that scheduled for release?
That's still a little ways out because, like I said, we just got done filming it, so we're starting to edit it now.
Oh, okay.
Like, we're just now editing that, so that's got a little ways to go. We haven't even really made it public. I mean, we have an IMDb up. We're just kind of letting people find out about it organically because we know that people, like, will want to talk to us about it. We're like, we're just not there yet. We're not done. We're not
sure. Yeah.
We've got to interview some pretty cool people for that, and I hope to interview even more because we want to interview some other metal musicians. To say like, hey, all bullshit aside, like these guys are fantastic players. Yeah, and we got some comedians in there to kind of talk about how they are funny. Because that's the thing.
They're
like,
hilarious.
Dave Brockie was as funny as any, SNL. I mean, he just was a hilarious guy. And the other guys are funny, too. They've kept that spirit alive. So we got, like, Thomas Lennon from... I know him from the state, but he's also Dangle on Reno 911. Mm-hmm. We got to interview Weird Al. That was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Because it's weird because, one, he was on a cartoon called they tried to make a Gwar. I guess it's like a pilot. You can find it online, but it's called The Animated Tales of Gwar. And it looks like they were going to maybe try to make an Adult Swim show, which I hope they do one day.
God, that would be amazing.
With the success of like Metalocalypse, right? Like it would just be perfect. But he was on that. And also, when you think about it, they kind of make sense because they're both parody acts, kind of. And, he's got to wear all those costumes, like that fat suit and all those wigs and stuff. So he was able to talk about that, and then we got to interview Alex Winter from Bill and Ted.
Sure.
He had a show in the 90s called The Idiot Box on MTV.
I remember that,
Gwar. That was a great show. And so he got to kind of talk about that. And he's just a real big music guy, so he was able to he knows them, and it's just been it's been a great experience.
That's totally killer, dude. To backtrack a little bit, I can't ever let any mention of the helicopters on my show go unacknowledged. That is my favorite rock band of all time.
Is it really? Oh, nice.
Them and Thin Lizzy are my two favorite rock and roll bands of all time. So, always hails to the mighty Helicopters. It's just a matter of chance that I am not wearing either a Helicopters hat or shirt right now because they're both in regular rotation. I fucking love that band.
I love Helicopters are amazing.
Casey Orr from Gwar was in a band called the Hellions in the late 90s, early 2000s with my friend Dave Woodward. Shout out Dave Woodward. And I did a bunch of artwork for them, and and it was Casey's turn to pay for art, and I got a signed check from Beefcake of Gwar.
Wow.
I mean, it was Casey's name, but I was like looking, I was like, yeah, look at that. I got a personal check from one of the guys from Gwar.
Beefcake. Yeah. It's cool because it's like double Beefcake now. Like, to me, my two favorite Beefcakes, Michael Bishop and Casey Orr, are both in Gwar at the same time. It's like, it's crazy. Yeah, I got to interview, because Casey lives out in Texas still. Yep. He lives in Dallas, and I got to interview him. That was cool. Being a Texas musician, you can't not know, the work that those guys did. So that was a real pleasure. And there was a guitarist named Pete Lee that was in Gwar for a minute. And he was kind of like Mike Scascia's protege. So they both have that super fast picking style. So that was really cool. We got to interview Pete for the doc. He's in there. And there's another guy named Zach Blair, who was also the lead guitar player for Gwar for a little while. And Zach was in a band. I knew him from a band. He played in punk bands in Texas, but he's in Rise Against. Like, he's gone on to be like a huge musician. But yeah, he plays in a band called the Draculas that are a really fun, like, kind of proto-punk, early punk sounding band.
I love that stuff. That stuff's that's like my going from like death metal and grindcore every single day, all day for 20 years of my life. And as I've reached and passed the age of 50, that's like where most of my listening goes now is like, I like proto-punk and, a lot of that early stuff, Sonics and the Mummies and, Helicopters and, there's a band out of Montreal called Le Breastfeeders. If you've never heard of them, check them out.
Okay.
That band absolutely rips.
I'll check them out.
Oh, their lyrics are in French. they're the coolest band. I found them totally random. I was at South by Southwest, and me and a friend of mine went to see Dan Deacon. People will remember Dan Deacon from the little video of the gecko talking shit, drinking out of cups. Yeah. So I went to see Dan Deacon play, which is its own experience in a tiny
I've always
bar.
wanted to. I've never got to see him.
Tiny little bar in Texas at South by Southwest. And if anybody is familiar with South by, you'll see like 5 bands in one spot, and not one of the bands will be like any of the other bands. So it was like a hip hop DJ with a trap rapper and Dan, and then Dan Deacon, and then like out on this patio of this tiny bar. And when I'm saying tiny, I'm talking about like the size of 2 large bathrooms, home bathrooms size. And this band from Montreal set up and just ripped so hard. I couldn't even believe how good they were. And they it's been a good 10 years. Le Breastfeeders, go check them out, everybody, because that band is super awesome.
Oh, wow.
To tie back a little bit to what we were talking about and your film we're here to talk about, the Idiot Box thing, and I kind of brushed on it a little bit, how similar Nickelodeon modeled their initial growth phase after MTV's growth phase. And so things like Idiot Box are not very different, or Liquid TV even. We're not very different at all from Ren and Stimpy or Pete and Pete. And some of these other more subversive shows that MTV did in the late night hours.
Yes.
I think,
like, for example, Ren and Stimpy was on both.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Ren and Stimpy, they literally played the same show on MTV and Nickelodeon, and there was kind of a fight over where it, because Nickelodeon, at that time, Ren and Stimpy was the biggest show that Nickelodeon had. So they didn't want to give it up. They're like, we finally made our own cartoon, and it's a smash hit. But MTV was kind of saying, it belongs with us. And realistically, like, it did. Like, it probably would have done even better. Like, you look at, like, Beavis and Butthead. So I guess, like, kind of the middle ground was to let them both play it. Like, you see it in our film. We play a Ren and Stimpy stinger on MTV, which a lot of people don't remember. But the whole vibe of, like, the Nicktoons, there was something going on in animation, and maybe you can talk about it being in that world. Like, Liquid TV and, like, the Nicktoons, they all felt like this movement that was all together, because it was, like, really weird, like Eon Flux and Beavis and Butthead and all that stuff. And the way the Nicktoons animation was really stale up until that point. Like, it was just kind of lame. And then Nicktoons was part of that thing that revitalized it. Like, Ren and Stimpy had that very much, like, the what is it, like the squishing and stretching and the grossness and the humor that like real animation that had been missing. And like Rugrats, how they looked ugly and disgusting, as opposed to like babies always being needed. Everyone always had to draw babies as beautiful
super
and perfect.
Cute. Yeah,
super cute. Like all of that, because I was kind of in that age where I was watching both. I was kind of going from, in the late 90s, I was going from one to the other,
Sure.
And it felt like it was all the same thing in a lot of ways, because, that whatever that movement in animation that happened, it felt like Nickelodeon and MTV were both on the pulse of that.
Yeah, I think that where that came from, there's a couple things, because when I was going to animation school, one thing for sure is that all of us were all punk rockers, and there wasn't a lot of like normal people in the animation in animation schools at that time, because we were all that we had all grown up in that kind of space. And the Spike and Mike Animation Festival was a thing. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it was it was like an animation festival that ran in art house theaters, and they would just take student animation films and put them all into one night. You'd go for a night and you'd watch like
Wow.
3 hours of animation shorts. And so, you know,
And this is like early 90s?
this was like late 80s. We're talking 87,
Wow.
88, 89
Okay.
in that time frame. And so guys like Mike Judge had his first exposure as an animator was in Spike and Mike. As a matter of fact, I'm almost positive Beavis and Butthead was part of one of those Spike and Mike animation festivals. It was like Frog Baseball was the very first.
Yep, I remember it.
And I'm pretty sure that short came out of that. And then John Kay, who was the creator of Ren and Stimpy, was already an established animator. He had been on Mighty Mouse and had gotten fired because he made Mighty Mouse snort a bunch of powder. He'd had a flower from his female love interest, whose name I can't come up with right now. But he had a flower from her, and he crushed it into dust, and he sniffed it up. And that was the end of John Kay's animation career on Mighty Mouse. There was a lot of parents who were like, "What are you doing, dude?" And so he got fired from that and kind of just started his own company, Spumco. And I got a chance to sit down and spend some time with John Kay once.
Wow.
And you have never met a person. It's unfortunate what ended up coming out about John. And I won't get too far down that rabbit hole, but you have never met anybody who was so passionate about, and I have never to this day met anybody who's so passionate about the art of animation, and everything was so important to him. You talk about the squash and stretch, and you talk about all that gross out stuff. And, you know, to sit and listen to him talk about how important style was, even over quality style. So when you look at the characters, even that surrounded Ren and Stimpy, the other characters in the show, they had so much style. And
you're right. Yeah.
And he built a team around himself. And you guys talk about it in your film that came up with things like the song for Log, you know, and it was like, you know, it was like a Whammo commercial from the 70s for for Slinky or some dumb product that they convinced you was a toy. And like, just being able to, just the genius of that group of guys who made Ren and Stimpy under the umbrella of John and the Spumco studios. Yeah, man, that I don't know if we'll ever see anything like that. It was kind of the last thing like the Warner Termite Terrace group of animators who did all of the Looney Tunes stuff, you know, in the 40s and 50s. That group of animators and that studio and the kind of budgets and quality they were ever able to put into film it will never be seen again in human history. It is an American treasure.
Yeah. And
I think John got close again to making something like that when he had Spumco together. And you know, now everything's just, I still love animation. It's still, you know, something that I really, really love. But the way things are made, you know, everything's made with computers now, and I don't have a problem with that because I made animation with computers for a long time. But it'll never be like it was. You know what I mean? Like, you can have great shows like SpongeBob, but
It reminds me a lot talking to my good buddy Jeff, who's a lot like you. He went to school for animation, and he was hugely influenced by Spumco. He loved all that stuff. Even back then, I can remember him telling me how much he loved it and how, just what you're saying, you know, he never got to meet John Kay, but like,
dude was a
having
maniac.
a reverence for like real. I met him once during the production, and it was very weird. But you know, Jeff always grew up with a deep reverence for real animation, the art, the craft and art of animating. And so whenever we decided we wanted to use animation on the Orange Years, because you know we have all these fantastic stories that nobody was filming, and so we want to bring them to life. And we thought about animation, which that's not a particularly original idea. You know, a lot of documentaries do animation, but we wanted it to me, it's got to fit.
Yeah.
If you're going to do animation, it has to fit. And I was like, oh my God, well, one of my best friends in the world, it was hugely influenced by Spumco. Like, his animation style will fit perfectly because it kind of feels like that early 90s Nicktoons vibe. And his name is Jeff Johnson. And so there's 3 or 4 different stories in there that he brings to life. And I think they came out. I was so impressed with his work on it. I think he does that old school style where it's all frame by frame by frame. You know, he draws it on a pad, on a Wacom tab. I don't know if I never know if I'm saying that right. Wacom, Wacom.
I got a big one right here.
You've got right there. Yeah. But he doesn't do any of the, like, you know, he draws it all one frame at a time.
Yeah, it's how you should do it, man.
The work that he did is so incredible. Like, there's a Mark Summers story that he does in there. You've seen it. And
it's so good. Your movie's really good, and the fact that you took the time to tie those original animations into a movie about a place that reinvented the animation industry. You don't have Adult Swim if it wasn't for Nicktoons.
No way.
You don't have it.
There's no way.
You know, you don't have a Disney Channel. You don't have an Adult Swim. You know, you just don't. I think Cartoon Network, kind of came out of Comedy Central to some extent. I remember when I first moved here, the Cartoon Network was just getting started.
Okay.
And they were in the Hanna-Barbera studios, you know, Hanna-Barbera, who did the Flintstones and the Jetsons and all that stuff we grew up on. None of those shows, nobody watched Hanna-Barbera shows anymore. So when the Nicktoons became a big deal, they're like, well, we're just going to get a bunch of new blood in this building. And they just gave Cartoon Network this entire section of the Hanna-Barbera studios on Cahuenga in Hollywood. And I got to go tour there and just, you know, talk, because we were working on a Johnny Quest. They rebooted Johnny Quest, and I was working on a project with the rebooted Johnny Quest. And we went to go check that out, and talking, you know, we walked by the Cartoon Network room, and I was like, what's going on in there? And they're like, oh, well, we're working on this show called Dexter's Laboratory, and we're working on this show called Johnny Bravo, and all the original Cartoon Network stuff. And I was like, oh, so this is like Nicktoons. And they're like, yeah, but it's Nickelodeon. It's like the whole network is cartoons. And I was like, holy shit. And they were like, do you have a sketchbook?
Wow.
And I was like, I ended up going back and taking my sketchbook over there. And you know, nobody I was working with at the time knew. And they were like, went through my sketchbook and caught a couple characters and like, you interested in the show? And I was like, what? And they're like, we're just giving people time and space to create their own cartoon shows. Wow. And I was like, shit, but I had like kids and I had a stable job. And I was like, I appreciate the offer. And I ended up staying in video games. And over the course of that first 4 years I was in LA, I kept getting offers to move from games into animation. And I just never, because it's like every other film industry job, you're full-time freelance and you don't know. With the animation industry, at that time, there wasn't a lot getting done. And so you might work for 9 months and then not work for a year, you know, and then having a family, I was like, I just decided to stay in games. But, you know, I got a written offer to work on Space Jam, you know, and like a bunch of these like huge animation projects that I'm like, oh, I probably should have went that way, because I was, as a kid, I grew up playing games, but as an adult, I was never a gamer, and I never really loved the game industry. It was just a way to you know, to be able to provide for my family. And and everybody I worked with the exception of a few people I really, really loved, and I'm still friends with today. And, but I still love animation, and part of me is like, you should have just done that. And now I'm so far removed from being an animator of any kind that I don't think I could get back into it. But every now and then I get the itch to like, I'm just going to do a little sequence, I'm like, now that you can do it digital and things like Photoshop have built-in animation capabilities. I'm like, maybe I'll just do a little sequence and see if I still have those chops. But I think for me, like, your movie, like I was saying, like, it scratches the surface of all of that great stuff that a whole generation of kids are going to watch this and just, they're going to go straight down the nostalgia tube as fast as they can, because it's so perfectly done and it's paced. You show the progression and I know my kids are going to watch it and they'll be like, oh God, I totally remember that. I remember when Blue's Clues came on. I remember when Gullah Gullah Island came on, and like, and when the first time we saw like, the Wild Thornberries or the first, like all that stuff. And like, there's this whole generation who's going to watch your movie and they're just going to be like, they're going to be so sucked into it. And you did such a good job of timing and pacing and the timeline of it. I think you did an amazing job. You did that. You did
thanks.
Something that is important to American culture, like way more than justice. You did a fantastic job, dude.
Oh, well, that means a lot. Yeah, we knew this was we were very honored to get to tell this story. So, I really hope we did it justice. So that means a lot to hear you say that. There's a lot of important people in our film, and yeah, we're excited to get it out there.
That's awesome. So it comes out on November 17th on iTunes and on Amazon Prime. Everybody look for it. I'll have links in the description below so that everybody can find it, because it'll be about, this episode will come out a week before it airs.
Cool.
And man, I'm going to let you get back to your life and your family.
Okay.
And I appreciate you coming on and talking with me about it. It was super cool to watch your film. And again, I think people are really going to love it. And I absolutely want you to come back when you have the Gwar thing together.
Oh, I will. You better believe it. Thank you so much.
Of course, man. Thank you.
All right, man. Have a good one.
You too.